July 20th, 1402. The plains near Ankara, Anatolia. Imagine standing on a dusty battlefield, watching 85,000 Ottoman soldiers, the most feared army in the world, slowly disintegrating before your eyes. The Sultan himself, Bayazid I, called the Thunderbolt for his lightning-fast conquests, is about to experience something he's never known in his entire military career: total, catastrophic defeat. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. This wasn't just a military loss. What happened on this battlefield would reduce one of history's most powerful rulers to a humiliated prisoner, paraded as a trophy. Some accounts even say used as a human footstool. Before we dive into this incredible story, welcome to General History class, where we explore the battles, empires, and turning points that shaped our world. If you're passionate about understanding how history's greatest leaders rose and fell, hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button to support the channel. And share this video with anyone who loves epic historical stories. Trust me, what you're about to learn about the Battle of Ankara will completely change how you think about leadership, strategy, and the dangers of unchecked pride. Now let's get back to me. To understand how spectacularly everything went wrong for Bayazid, you need to know who these two men were. Bayazid I'd spent the last decade doing what seemed impossible, doubling the size of the Ottoman Empire. He crushed European crusader armies at Nicopolis in 1396, a victory so complete that it sent shockwaves through Christian Europe. Cities fell before him, armies scattered. His nickname wasn't metaphorical. His campaigns really did strike like thunderbolts, fast and overwhelming. By 1402, he'd been besieging Constantinople for 8 years, and the great Byzantine capital was on its knees, months away from collapse. Now, enter Emir Timur, or, as you might know him, Tamerlane. This wasn't some random challenger. Timur had clawed his way from the remnants of the fractured Mongol Empire to become the most feared conqueror in Central Asia. Cities that resisted him weren't just defeated. They were erased, entire populations annihilated, with pyramids of skulls left as warnings. He'd conquered from Delhi to Damascus, and despite being in his 60s and physically disabled from old war wounds, hence the lame insult, his mind remained razor-sharp. These were two of the most dangerous men alive, and they were about to collide. So how did these two unstoppable forces end up on a collision course? The catalyst was both political and personal. When Timur conquered parts of eastern Anatolia, he exiled several local princes, the beyliks who ruled those territories. Bayazid, either out of genuine hospitality or strategic calculation, gave these princes refuge. To Timur, this was an intolerable insult. These were his defeated enemies, and Bayazid was harboring them. The letters that followed were extraordinary examples of 14th century trash talk. Bayazid, drunk on his own success, called Timur a lame shepherd and brigand, basically a crippled nobody playing at being a conqueror. Timur, ever the psychological tactician, responded with carefully crafted insults designed to bait Bayazid's pride. He questioned the Sultan's legitimacy, his manhood, his right to rule. Here's the critical mistake. Bayazid took the bait. And if you're already seeing the strategic mistakes unfolding here, drop a comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done differently if you were Bayazid? The comment section is where we learn from each other, so let's discuss this together. C. Bayazid was obsessed with taking Constantinople. He'd invested 8 years, enormous resources, prestige, political capital, into this siege. Victory was within reach. A smart leader would have either made peace with Timur or delayed the confrontation until after Constantinople fell. But Bayazid's ego wouldn't let him back down from what he saw as a challenge from an inferior. This is where we see the first leadership lesson emerging. Sometimes the battles you choose not to fight are more important than the ones you win. Modern CEOs and military strategists still study this principle. Knowing when not to engage is often more valuable than knowing how to fight. While Bayazid was responding with angry letters and bravado, Timur was doing something far more dangerous. He was preparing. Timur's army marched westward. But this wasn't just a military movement. He was gathering intelligence, recruiting defectors, and studying his enemy. He knew Bayazid's army had been campaigning for years. He knew they were stretched thin. He knew the Anatolian soldiers in Bayazid's ranks had been forcibly conscripted from the very territories Timur had conquered. They'd been fighting for their conqueror, not their choice. Then came the psychological warfare. Before the armies even met, Timur's forces systematically poisoned wells and burned crops along Bayazid's route. This wasn't random destruction. It was calculated deprivation. By the time the Ottoman army reached the battlefield near Ankara, they were already exhausted, demoralized, and desperately short on supplies. Think about this from a modern strategic perspective. Timur was fighting the battle before the battle even started. He was eroding his enemy's capacity to fight through environmental manipulation and psychological pressure. This is what military theorists today call shaping the battlefield, controlling the conditions before the actual engagement. When the two armies finally faced each other on July 20th, 1402, Bayazid's 85,000 men looked formidable on paper. His janissaries, the elite infantry corps that had become legendary, formed the center. His Sipaha cavalry, among the finest horsemen in the world, guarded the flanks. This should have been a fair fight, maybe even an Ottoman victory. But battles aren't fought on paper. Timur had positioned his forces brilliantly, and crucially, his troops were well rested and well supplied, while Bayazid's men were already operating on fumes. The Ottoman army had been maneuvering for days, trying to find water and food. Morale was cracking before the first arrow was even fired. The fighting began fiercely. Both sides committed fully. The Janissaries fought with their characteristic discipline and courage. Bayazid himself led from the front with the same reckless bravery that had won him so many victories. For hours, it seemed like it might be a grinding, brutal stalemate. Swords clashed, arrows darkened the sky, and blood soaked the Anatolian plains. Then came the moment that would change everything: the betrayal. Remember those Anatolian soldiers, the ones forcibly conscripted from territories Timur had conquered? As the battle raged and the Ottoman right flank began to waver under pressure, they made their choice. They turned. Entire units that had been fighting for Bayazid suddenly switched sides and rode over to join Timur's army. They weren't defecting to a stranger. They were rejoining the man who'd defeated their original lords, the man they saw as the stronger, more legitimate power. This is one of the most dramatic betrayals in military history, and it's a perfect example of why we study these battles here on General History class. If you're learning something new, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming episodes on other pivotal battles that changed the course of empires. In military terms, this defection was absolutely catastrophic. It wasn't just losing soldiers. It was losing them to the enemy side, creating massive gaps in the Ottoman lines while simultaneously reinforcing Timur's forces with fresh troops who knew Ottoman tactics intimately. The Ottoman formation began to collapse like a house of cards in a windstorm. Bayazid, watching his carefully constructed army disintegrate before his eyes, ordered a desperate counterattack. The Janissaries, loyal to the end, fought brilliantly and bravely, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers and by fresh enemy troops pouring through the breaches in the Ottoman lines. By sunset, the once mighty Ottoman army was completely shattered. Bayazid's sons had either fled the battlefield or been captured. The Sultan himself was taken prisoner while attempting to escape, his grand empire crumbling around him in a single afternoon. What happened next is where this story becomes truly remarkable from a psychological and political standpoint. Timur didn't just defeat Bayazid. He systematically humiliated him. The Sultan who'd terrorized Europe, who'd made Christian kings tremble at the mere mention of his name, was now paraded before foreign courts as a broken prisoner. Historical accounts vary on the specific details. Some sources claim he was kept in an iron cage and transported like an animal. Others say he was literally used as a footstool by Timur during royal audiences, forced to kneel, so Timur could step on his back when mounting his horse. Whether these specific details are completely accurate or somewhat embellished by later chroniclers, what's undeniable is that Bayazid's treatment was deliberately designed to destroy his dignity as completely as his army had been destroyed on the battlefield. This wasn't just cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was strategic messaging on a geopolitical scale. Timur was sending a crystal-clear signal to every other ruler from Europe to China. This is exactly what happens when you challenge me. The mighty Thunderbolt, the man who'd crushed crusader armies and besieged the greatest city in Christendom, was reduced to a broken, humiliated old man. Bayazid died in captivity less than a year later, in March 1403. While some sources suggest natural causes, many historians believe he died from a combination of despair, humiliation, and the psychological trauma of his catastrophic fall from power. The Battle of Ankara didn't just end one man's life. It changed the trajectory of multiple empires and altered the course of world history. The Ottoman Empire, which had seemed unstoppable and destined to conquer all of Europe, fractured into a brutal civil war as Bayezid's surviving sons fought viciously over the succession. This period, known historically as the Ottoman Interregnum, lasted over a decade and nearly destroyed the empire entirely. Constantinople, the great Byzantine capital that had been literally weeks away from falling to Bayezid's siege, suddenly got an unexpected reprieve. The Ottoman threat evaporated overnight. The Byzantine Empire, which should have ended in 1402, survived another 50 years. It wouldn't finally fall until 1453 under Mehmed II. The Christian kingdoms of Europe, who'd been absolutely terrified of Ottoman expansion after the disaster at Nicopolis, suddenly found themselves saved not by crusader armies or divine intervention, but by an even more terrifying Muslim conqueror from the east. It's one of history's great ironies. Europe was rescued from one Islamic empire by another, even more fearsome one. For Timur himself, Ankara was the capstone achievement of his extraordinary career. He'd proven himself superior to the Ottoman Sultan and demonstrated his dominance over both East and West. But here's the thing about empires built primarily on personal military conquest. They don't outlast the conqueror. Timur died just 3 years later in 1405, and his vast empire immediately began fragmenting as his descendants fought over the succession. We've covered other empire-building conquerors here on General History Class. If you want to understand how Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, and Napoleon all faced similar challenges, check out our playlist on history's greatest military leaders. The link is in the description below. So what can we learn from this 622-year-old battle? Why does this story still matter today? First, overconfidence is a strategic liability, especially when it blinds you to genuine threats. Bayazid's mockery of Timur as a lame old man wasn't just rude or disrespectful. It was strategically stupid. He underestimated his opponent based on superficial characteristics, age, physical disability, while completely ignoring the substance of Timur's proven military genius and track record of victories. In modern business and military contexts, this same mistake gets repeated constantly, dismissing competitors because they don't fit your mental model of what a threat looks like. Second, preparation beats improvisation every single time. Timur spent months methodically setting up the conditions for victory before a single arrow was fired. He poisoned wells, burned crops, gathered intelligence, recruited defectors, and positioned his forces perfectly. Modern business strategists and military planners would immediately recognize this principle. You win by controlling the environment and conditions before the actual competition or conflict begins. Third, loyalty is conditional and context-dependent. Those Anatolian defectors who switched sides during the battle remind us that forced allegiance is inherently fragile. Whether we're talking about medieval conscript armies or modern organizations, people ultimately align with what they perceive as strength, legitimacy, and their own interests. You can't build lasting power on coercion alone. Finally, effective leadership requires managing your resources and choosing your battles wisely, not just winning the ones you fight. Bayazid's fatal mistake wasn't his military tactics on the battlefield. It was his strategic decision to fight Timur at all while he was still besieging Constantinople. His refusal to prioritize, his inability to recognize when to delay a confrontation, cost him literally everything he'd built. The Battle of Ankara stands as one of history's most dramatic examples of how quickly fortunes can reverse when arrogance meets preparation, when improvisation meets systematic strategy, and when a leader's ego writes checks their army simply can't cash. Bayazid the Thunderbolt had struck fast and hard his entire military career, until he met someone who'd been patiently, methodically waiting to strike back even faster and harder. From sultan to footstool, from conqueror to captive, from emperor to humiliated prisoner. That's the story of the Battle of Ankara. If you found this deep dive into one of history's most dramatic battles valuable, do me a favor. Share this video with someone who loves history or anyone who could benefit from these leadership lessons. Subscribe to General History Class for more stories like this. And let me know in the comments what battle you want us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.